Okay, that's close enough. So we'll call the meeting of the Yankton City Planning Commission to order. It is 5:30 on Monday, March 8th, 2021. Is Brooke on, or are you taking care of
I'm right
it?
here.
Brooke, roll call, please.
Yep. Erickson.
Erickson here.
Erickson, I. Specht.
Specht here.
Specht here. Womble.
Womble here.
Womble here. Syme.
I'm here.
Syme here. Mooney.
Mooney here.
Mooney here. City Commission Liaison Sarda.
Sarda here.
Sarda here. ETJ member Welch.
Here.
Welch here. And Chairman Peer.
Chairman Pierce here.
Here. Great.
Okay, there being a quorum for business, we'll move on to the second item under routine business is the consideration of the February 8th, 2021 meeting minutes. We're with your packet. Are there any corrections or additions, or if not, is there a motion to approve those meeting minutes?
This is Erickson. I did not see anything that I would need to be changed for me, so I'll make a motion to approve the minutes as presented.
This is Mooney. I'll second that motion.
Thank you. Roll call on the approval of the meeting minutes of February 8th, 2021, please.
Yep. Specht.
Aye.
Specht, I. Womble.
Womble, I.
Womble, I. Syme.
I'm I.
Syme, I. Mooney.
Mooney, aye.
Mooney, I. Erickson.
Erickson, aye.
Erickson, I. And Peer.
Your aye.
Peer, I.
Okay, those minutes are approved and will be accepted. Next item is public appearances or introductions. Are there any individuals or is anybody present in the commission room
We
this
have
time?
no guests present at the commission meeting room.
Okay, thank you, Dwayne. So moving on then to consent items, there are none. Old business, there's none. So we'll move into new business. The first action item is a plat review of lots 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12. Block 10 Westbrook Estates being a replat of lots 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. Block 10 of Westbrook Estates in Tract 1 of Law Addition in the southeast quarter of Section 1, Township 93 North, Range 56 West of the 5th Prime Meridian, City of Yankton, Yankton County, South Dakota. Address is the south side of the 2500 block of the 1600 block of West 25th Street. Johannesson Contracting, Inc. is the owner. And staff provided a review of this action item with comments. Dave, would you comment or give any additional updates that you have or on this particular item?
Sure. As we all know, markets change. These lots were originally platted for smaller duplexes, and the developer has come to the conclusion that larger homes and on larger lots are more suitable for the market that he is targeting. So essentially, we're creating fewer lots with the new property lines. The developer plans on having duplexes on each of the lots that he will maintain ownership of and provide as rentals, or if he does sell them, he'll sell them as a duplex in its entirety at a time. They are set up though with individual utilities, so they can be platted off separately if somewhere down the road that decision is made. So kind of a housekeeping measure based on market trends in that area off the south side of West 25th Street. Staff recommends approval. And for the minutes, we can note that Mike Healy has arrived.
Okay, thank you. Welcome, Mike. Thank you. Are there any questions by commission members about this plat review or action item? So Dave, lots 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 just go away and are replaced by 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12?
Correct. That's how the recording will read when you track the chain of title over at the Register of Deeds and after this one's filed. I try not to get too involved in the surveyor's business as far as naming and numbering sequences go, unless there's something that's just extremely out of the ordinary or sounds too close to something else. But surveyors are licensed to do their job, so we try and let them do that part of it as much as possible without influencing their naming and numbering systems.
Okay, if there are no questions or comments from commission, what about anybody on YouTube and or anybody that may have shown up at the commission room?
There are no comments on YouTube, and if there's anybody at the commission room, they can step to the podium right now.
We have no guests in the meeting room at this point in time.
Is there a motion regarding this plat review?
Erickson moves to approve the proposed plat change.
Syme seconds.
So we have a motion and second to approve the plat. Roll call, please.
Womble.
Aye.
Womble, I. Syme.
Syme, aye.
Syme, I. Mooney.
Mooney, aye.
Mooney, I. Erickson.
Erickson, aye.
Erickson, I. Specht.
Specht, aye.
Specht, I. Healy.
Healy, aye.
Healy, I. And Chairman Pierre.
Here, aye.
Pierre, I.
Okay, that plat review has been approved and it will be reviewed by the City Commission on March 22nd, 2021. Okay, the next item is a plat review of lots A and B in the south half of Lot 10 and lots C and D in the north half of Lot 9, Airport Acres Addition, City and County of Yankton, South Dakota. The address is 3010 Piper Street, Yankton, South Dakota. WDM Properties LLC. The South Dakota Limited Liability Company is the owner. And it appears that Brad Winande has joined the meeting. So Brooke, note that, please. Dave, provide us with any additional information other than the written plat review that you sent with the packet, please.
So we don't see this type of plat very often. It's a association plat for commercial purposes. Essentially, parts of two larger lots are being platted at the same time so that they can be further subdivided to not only provide individual development parcels, but also provide for common area for ingress, egress, and stormwater management. There'll have to be association documents created and filed at the state level so that everybody understands, of the four owners, understand their individual responsibilities as being a part of that association. From the community's perspective, from planning commission, city commission perspective, the key is to view the association in its entirety as one development, even though there'll be multiple water meters and electrical meters, et cetera, on site. The city won't be responsible for maintaining the ingress egress for like snow removal and things like that. That'll be association responsibilities, and also for maintaining the stormwater management area, that will be association responsibilities. Something kind of that we don't see very often, I won't say unique, but we don't see them very often, but everything is in order, and considering the previously approved developers agreement for the subdivision, staff recommends approval of the proposed plat.
Any questions or comments from the commission? Dave, what is the common area? Is that the drainage area?
Yeah, the common area off to the east is the stormwater management area. It will detain water so it doesn't leave the site at a level beyond historic rates, and it'll be metered out at historic rate at a maximum.
Any other questions, comments from commission?
Is the common area large enough for the area for the rest of the area?
So that's a great question. It is specifically designed for these parcels only. Sometimes we see subdivisions that have a larger stormwater management plan, like the one up for the Menards area that also addresses the Culvers and the dentist's office and everything else in one spot. Sometimes we see stormwater management plans that address issues lot by lot, similar to what we have on North Douglas, where the assisted living facility is by the funeral home there. This one had a kind of a little bit of a bumpy transition where it was originally thought it was going to have a development-wide stormwater management system. For one reason or another, that didn't occur over time, and so we are at the situation where individual parcels or developments have to address issues on site. Good question, really good question.
Thank you.
A question about the north half of lot 10. So just south of that is the actual lot line of this. Looks like it runs right with where the buildings will be, or not where the buildings will be, but that lot 10, the north half of lot 10 is not part of this at all, correct?
That is correct. That is where the insurance agency building is located. And so they're going to have some work to do if they want to expand that at all as far as stormwater management is concerned.
Okay.
Any other questions? Not, is there any YouTube comments, or is there anybody in the commission chambers regarding this?
There are no YouTube comments, and if anybody's in the chambers, they should step to the podium now.
We have no one in the meeting room at this time.
Is there a motion regarding this action number, or this action item, this plat review?
Womble moves to approve.
Beck, second.
We have a motion and second to approve the plat. Roll call, please.
Sime,
I'm I.
Sime, I. Mooney,
Mooney abstains.
Mooney abstains. Erickson,
Erickson, aye.
Erickson, I. Specht,
Beck, aye.
Specht, I. Wamble,
Womble, I.
Wamble, I. Healy,
Healy, aye.
Healy, I. Winandy,
Winandy, I.
Winandy, I. And Chairman Pierre,
Here, aye.
Pierre, I.
Okay, that plat has been approved, and it goes to the city commission for their action on March 22nd, 2021. Moving on to other business. First item is stormwater and floodplain management update. So I'll let Dave take over on this.
So, surprise to those new planning commissioners out there, if I was remiss in mentioning this at the orientation, you also are the Cities of Yankton Stormwater Advisory Board. And Brad Beast from our office, he's the Community Development Department Manager, is here to walk us through an annual process that we go through. We're going to focus more on stormwater management planning aspect of it. And he might mention a little bit at the end about FEMA floodplain mapping, but there's not a lot of new news related to that. So at this point, I'll let Brad take the helm.
I can just sense the enthusiasm to talk about stormwater management, but as you talked about today, it is an important topic. So I'm going to focus primarily on the MS4, our municipal separate storm sewer system, because we have one of those. And for those of you who are familiar with parts of the country where stormwater and the sanitary sewers are mixed together, and the terrible, awful things that happen when that's the case, there are rules related to the separate storm sewer system that we have to comply with. And so one of the things that our ordinance says is that our Stormwater Advisory Board, you folks, at least once a year, take a look at what we're doing and provide some feedback and advice on what it is that we're doing. But maybe before we get to that stage, I like to give a little update about what it is that we're doing and the challenges that we face, and then ask for some feedback. So feel free to stop me. I will talk about pretty much exclusively stormwater management, and then at a later date this year, we can talk about floodplain management, which is related but regulated sort of differently. We think it's a good idea to name the terms that we're talking about. So stormwater, the simplest description I can give you is if it didn't fall out of the sky, it doesn't belong in the storm sewer. So stormwater would be snowmelt, precipitation, and here we're generally going to talk about things that end up in a storm drain, or that drain to Marne Creek or the Missouri River in the city of Yankton. Obviously, that impervious surfaces situation is what causes a lot of the reason to have this sort of conversation. That's because it tends to pick up stuff on the way to the storm sewer, and our goal, generally speaking, is that stormwater pick up as little stuff as possible on its way to Marne Creek and the Missouri River. I think I'll tell a little bit of an embarrassing story about myself. When I started here, I didn't know much at all about stormwater or what happened. I knew that water went to a drain and then it went away. And that's what I knew about stormwater. And I think generally speaking, that's what my friends and neighbors know about what happens to stormwater as well. I think there's maybe an idea in some people's mind that stormwater is treated or there's some process that occurs after it enters the storm drain. But that's not the case. 100% of the stuff that goes into the storm sewer either falls out in the pipe and becomes a blockage, or goes all the way to the end and ends up in Martin Creek or the Missouri River. And I think, when I have conversations with people about the importance of protecting stormwater, the example I'll often give them is, if you aren't willing to go down to Riverside Park and dump that into the river, it shouldn't be ending up on the street or in a storm drain, because that's really what's happening. It's taking a circuitous course to get there, and maybe it gets filtered out a little bit, but realistically, what gets discharged ends up untreated in Martin Creek and the Missouri River. And this is one of those situations where being proactive is important, because cleanup and nuisances related to this can be expensive and very damaging. I'll save you all of the details except to say that the Clean Water Act happened, and over time, states through the EPA had to regulate progressively smaller communities, first starting with large ones over 100,000, and then eventually getting down to smaller ones like us. So in April of 2003, the city of Yankton was permitted by the South Dakota DENR as a separate municipal storm sewer system. And that's kind of the reporting I'll talk about a little bit as we go through here. So we operate underneath of the state's blanket permit. So they tell us what the reporting is like. It's because the Clean Water Act says we have to regulate it and we have to keep track. We operate under the state's permit, so our permit sits under their umbrella. The state has been working on a new permit with the EPA, and I thought the last time I talked to you guys, I think I said probably the next time we would have a new one. Well, I'm going to say that same thing again, because there's no new permit that we're operating under, so I don't know anything new. I do think, or they have said, they're going to try to be a little more specific with us about kind of rules and kind of metrics, because right now it's a little bit more write your own menu in the way that we develop our stormwater management plan locally. This just talks about all the places that stormwater management lives in our ordinance. You can see it shows up in a whole bunch of different sections. And that means it's also a shared responsibility. Community development does sort of the administrative side of these kinds of things. We help with the reporting, but we work with parks and environmental services and with public works on all of the implementation side of what this looks like. Our stormwater management plan is a written plan. It's available on the website that you can read sometime if you'd like to know what our detailed plan is. It includes spill responses, best management practices, minimum control measures. These things all in turn inform the way that our departments internally respond to and manage the larger system, as well as provide broad guidelines when we work with contractors and developers and those sorts of folks in the private world about and homeowners in the way that stormwater is managed. One of the requirements is citizen participation. You guys providing oversight and feedback and identifying new areas of concern for us if they exist, when they exist. Our plan identifies the local pollutants of concern. So for us, we've identified oil and grease as a concern, both illicit dumping and what is much less common now, but at one time was a lot more common for washing of vehicles, equipment, and other sorts of things in the street. With the availability of commercial vehicle washes, we just don't see that as much as we maybe once did. Litter and trash, pesticide and nutrient runoff, household chemicals. Again, with household hazardous waste collection and some of those things, we don't see nearly as much illicit dumping of household stuff. Viruses, bacteria, nutrients from pet waste, road salts, and again, that you'll if you read our plan, you'll see that we try not to apply more road salt than we need. That's a good economic decision, but it's also a good environmental decision. And the street sweeper comes along and tries to collect the excess so that doesn't end up washing into the street. The street sweeper is operating pretty much every day of the year that it can operate. That's probably something folks don't realize. It's not just there for leaves in the springtime or the fall. It's there for road salts as well. And then sediments, aggregates, and yard waste, stuff that ends up in the street. I will say, of the 4 pictures at the bottom, 2 of them are from Yankton. The pile of leaves out in the street and the grass that probably needed to have been mowed a couple of weeks before it got mowed and blown out into the street. So practically speaking, those are situations that we end up having conversations with folks about better ways to manage those wastes. That you can dispose of them for free, you can mulch, you can do a lot of things, but the street isn't the ideal location for either of those things. So what do we do to try to help people understand what they can do to be a part of stormwater management? We've got a commercial brochure. One of the big emphases of stormwater management is reaching out to large commercial folks. So we've got a brochure. In 2015, it was a new thing, so we mailed it out to all of the commercial customers. And when we have new water and sewer customers for the city of Yankton, we try to make sure they get a brochure as well. Talks about basic business practices and things that might impact stormwater and where you manage the dumpsters or oil containers at your business, or the way you work with storing things outdoors on your property. That's also available. Anything I show you here is generally speaking available on our website as well. We have a growing map internally here that we are able to track existing storm sewer installations, where the inlets are, where the storm sewers are working, so that our internal crews are able to do dry water screenings of different locations in town, or dry weather screenings, excuse me. So for instance, there's a storm sewer outfall, and if it hasn't rained for a couple of weeks, you wouldn't anticipate that there'd be water running out of that outfall and into Marne Creek or somewhere else. That's where our parks and public works staff are able to use the mapping, look at those locations, and note a situation where maybe there's a cross connection, maybe something's being dumped in a location where it's showing up when you wouldn't expect there to be stormwater. We've got a construction guide that we work with our contractors and homeowners, gives practical advice about ways on large projects and small to do site management things that help reduce tracking off of the site into the street, or aggregates washing out. Hopefully, when we can get back to doing a few more community outreach group activities, actually have a live one in my office here somewhere, but I don't see it. There was a stenciling effort several years ago that marked storm drains. That was I think it was a Boy Scout project with spray paint. It was a great idea, but the spray paint only lasted so many years. And it also might not be a good idea to spray paint, because ultimately the spray paint ends up in the storm sewer too. So in thinking about maybe a better, longer lasting approach, we have a supply of these storm drain medallions, and we're going to try to focus on some areas of high visibility to raise public awareness about where storm drains are and encourage people not to put stuff in there that doesn't belong. I like this slide because it features a celebrity sump pump. That is Dave Mingo's sump pump. If you ever wanted to know what Dave's sump pump looks like, this is it. I don't have one at my house, so I had to press Dave into service to provide a picture of his. We're just getting ready, and I've actually submitted our 2020 annual report, so reporting on the previous year's work in stormwater management to DENR. In 2021, we started some work, but didn't get as far down the line with the pandemic as we had hoped in a interdepartmental effort to work with homeowners to make sure that storm sewer, that sump pumps are discharging outside of the house. It became very clear during a lot of wet weather and flooding events we've had over the last few years that our folks in environmental services at the wastewater plant are seeing seeing a big increase during weather events of surges of additional sanitary sewer effluent. And that tells us, sure, there's some leaking, sure, some drains are probably catching it, but there are also probably a lot of residential sump pumps that are connected to maybe directly connected to the sewer or running over to a floor drain or in a sink in the basement. And it's often, I think nearly all of the time, it's based on just not being aware that those things shouldn't be going into the sanitary sewer. So we're working with our finance department when folks come in to sign up for service, having some slick informational sheet available there. And I anticipate, and we've already done some outreach to plumbers and contractors. I anticipate more of that sort of direct outreach to folks who would be doing the install. And then at our own front desk, as we talk to homeowners and contractors, kind of asking the question as our building inspector and building official go through construction projects, kind of looking to make sure that there's provisions made for not directly connecting those to the sewer. And that kind of sort of sums up my my trip through the stormwater management process. I'm happy to entertain any questions you might have, or if something didn't make sense that I said.
Brad, this is Mike Healy. A question for you. What about, and how does the monitoring take place that represents those items that end up then in the, let's say, in the Missouri River or somewhere such that downstream localities could be impacted by it? How do we manage that if there are some items, again, that do pass through the system?
So that's a good question. The reality is very few, at least in our region, very few communities have an active sampling program. In dry weather, we're not going to expect anything to be in there. So unlike the sanitary sewer, you're not going to be able to pull a sample from a storm sewer unless you're in a rain event. So really where that testing and monitoring would come into place is when we're aware of or would suspect an illicit discharge, that something is going wrong on a more regular basis. There's not really, generally speaking, in most communities, a sampling of storm water during events. Again, unless you have a reason to believe something's maybe happening.
Just to follow up on that, Brad, should there be?
I would say that the idea of the program and the fact that cities and states across the country are doing this is to eliminate the need to have to target testing in that sort of a way. If we're doing the right best practices, it's within the tolerances imagined by the EPA, the rules, the state of South Dakota. the frustration I would have as an administrator is there are still, and I mentioned it at the beginning, there are still places in this country where the sanitary and storm sewers are interconnected, and it is routine to discharge sewage directly into lakes, rivers, and the ocean. Our nation's capital does it on a fairly regular basis when they have flooding events. I agree with you, Mike, that would be the goal would be to be at zero, but I think the effort in stormwater management is probably best spent in those areas where they, in large rain events, routinely have to discharge. And some of those communities are spending a lot of money to build extra holding capacity to try to address that. That to me is a bigger stormwater management concern. Those large communities who discharge untreated waste into lakes, rivers, and the oceans semi-regularly.
Are we self-monitored, or does the EPA or some agency periodically inspect ours and others just as a test?
DNR can show up and probably has showed up without telling me on plenty of occasions. They also monitor large construction projects. So I didn't talk about the permitting side. We permit smaller projects. The state in those areas larger than an acre, the state of South Dakota and DENR also permits those, and they're sort of the primary agency for those larger projects. And they most certainly check up on them, and I get calls occasionally from DENR asking about a project or a location, or there was something a couple of months ago where turned out not to be inside our corporate limits, but somebody had noted a pipe with water running from it, and they thought it was coming from someplace, and I got a call from DENR to say, hey, what do you know about this? So we respond to complaints locally. Our crews look for situations where discharges are happening, and then we follow up on those. And then the state also takes complaints and does monitoring on large projects.
Thank you, Brad. I do have one follow-up then too. Would be following your last answer is, with the combination of those two departments in Pierre, and I don't know the exact names, but one is environmental and with the Department of Agriculture, do you see any change? And does that impact any of this that you're referring to?
You know, really the Clean Water Act, the EPA rules, and the state permit are not changed by any of that. And I don't anticipate any difference in the staff that we work with, other than their email will say something different at the bottom of it. It's been a challenge for DENR to keep their surface water program fully staffed anyway. So it's a challenge for them to find folks to just have enough people there. It's been a staffing issue for them in the past. And I don't think that's going to change.
Okay, very good. Well, thank you, Brad.
Mm-hmm. Dave alluded to, and I do have an intro to floodplain management on there, which is basically to say I'll probably come back and chat with you folks later about floodplain. I don't have any news about mapping. In our last conversation with FEMA several months ago, we understood we'd have some materials to review in December or January, and I have not seen those. So we're really at no different place than we were several months ago, unless Dave has any other insight he thinks we ought to share, or thoughts on that process.
I do not have anything to add to that. We'll, I think they've heard our message loud and clear to this point, so we'll wait to see what they come back with and get you up to speed as soon as we know. Now would be the time if you have questions for Brad beyond what Commissioner Healy stated, to ask them, or if something pops into your mind in the next few days, feel free to shoot me an email, and we'll make sure to get your question answered that way too.
Brad, this is Evie Syme, and I was wondering that map that you had in your slideshow there that shows the different pathways that water takes, is that publicly available?
I- Yes, but not in an accessible sort of way. It's not available to the public. It's not published anywhere. Not because there's a secret to it, but mostly it's only interesting to our internal audience. We've never really had anyone want to see it, but we'd be happy to provide it to folks if they would be interested in it. It is a lot of blue lines on a map.
I'm mostly curious in how many different places that it outflows.
Oh, so that's a good question. I don't know the answer to that. A lot, and there are certainly outfalls that are not well tracked. So part of our mapping update is each time our crews do work, they identify these locations, and so we get things added to the map over time. With new developments, that's a lot easier because they're pretty obviously on the map. You get to some older parts of town, and for folks who lived here longer and seen Marne Creek over time, used to be a lot more common to stick a pipe and run it to Marne Creek, and whatever went through the pipe went to Marne Creek. That's not common anymore, and generally speaking, those things have been abandoned. So we have less and less of those sorts of things, and some pipes that remain there don't go anywhere anymore. They don't discharge anything. Dave was talking about individual stormwater management at locations there, retention and detention ponds. Those things, for the most part, eliminate those outfalls, those extra new outfalls. So we're left with the larger, more systematically planned ways of discharging stormwater.
Well, one thing I will mention is Brad has referred often to the Marne Creek and the Missouri River. You know, that's where the vast majority of stormwater that falls in Yankton ends up. We do have three basins, three fairly distinct basins. One of them's on the west side, and the actual final outfall is the duck pond across from the hospital, where it ends up about a fourth of the west side of town. The stormwater ends up in that West Side Park pond, and then travels through a great big culvert through the hill down to the base of the bluff and enters the Missouri River there. Then Marne Creek is the major central drainage basin. And then we do have an eastern basin also that if you go over to the east end of Ridgeway North and some of the Hillcrest property that Mr. Tramp developed, that ends up going east kind of through the old Gurney's seed and nursery area, ends up in a managed ditch that was built with an EDA project back in the 80s. That best way to describe that is it goes by the KOA campground and ends up down into the Missouri River in that location. So three big basins. Marne Creek obviously is by far the largest.
Thank you. I actually find this pretty interesting information, so I'm not bored to tears or anything.
We'll be happy to make any more detailed information in outfalls, and I'm sure that Parks or Public Works, and on a nice day, would be more than willing to take you on an outfall tour.
Speaking of the outfalls, so, and maybe I missed this part altogether, but so are these you said people go out periodically and like check these outfalls. So none of those are like actively monitored. Those just have to be manually checked from time to time. Because I know at like where I work at Applied Engineering, we monitor all of our outflow going out. So I was just curious if the city does something similar to that or no.
No, because and I should be clear that generally speaking, the stormwater is it's only picking up the things it encounters as it travels to the storm drain. So we wouldn't anticipate there'd be high levels of anything in there. We're really talking about trying to eliminate even the relatively minor sorts of things. So there's no active monitoring. But again, that would only be during a rain event where you're seeing a large volume of water come through. And I don't know that you would get the same quality of sampling that you would in a static system where you can sort of anticipate outflow and volume. So, for instance, and we're not necessarily testing things in the case of Marne Creek. Not all of the water in Marne Creek started in the city of Yankton either. So some of that's traveling in, and the larger the event, the more we're going to expect sediments and some of those other things to be present in Marne Creek, or even in the Missouri River for that matter, depending on the level of the event. What we're more focused on is in almost things so small they would be difficult to measure. And by that I mean, even if we sampled for suspended solids, it would be hard to know which construction site that was coming from. And it would probably be a really, really small amount. So rather than try to start at the end, we're trying to start at the beginning and say, how can we organize things in such a way so we're not ending up there? And that's the idea of the large projects and even smaller construction projects where we're working with contractors who might not do a lot of dirt work. And so something as simple as educating our contractors when we see a lot of disturbed earth when there doesn't need to be. So if you can leave the vegetation intact on a site, that will filter out silt from those piles of dirt that you're going to have there as a result of your work. And then if you avoid driving a bunch of extra pickups onto that site that would just be as easily parked out in the street on a wet, muddy kind of day, it would be hard for us with testing to ever figure out that. It's easier for us to start with things we know are problematic and work backwards. So that's those pollutants of concern, and the reason we kind of focus in on those kind of specific areas. And realistically, we don't have a lot of facilities and environmental factors that would make us particularly concerned about heavy metals and toxic chemicals, because we just don't. For the most part, we're talking about motor oil and things that leak out of somebody's car more than we're talking about a facility that breaks up old batteries on the ground and dumps their contents out. Those sorts of things.
So what we need to remember in this conversation, and that's a great point, Commissioner Womble, is that this discussion is about stormwater, not about effluent. So yes, many of our major manufacturers do have heavy metals related issues and other things where they actually have to do pre-treatment and state reporting. And so there is a monitoring and reporting at the outflow of what goes into the sanitary sewer. And some of those manufacturers or larger employers are also required to include a portion of their part of their report every year to address stormwater management and what they're doing. Much less extensive, typically not having to do with any on-site testing like they have with their effluent, actually. So good differentiation there to discuss.
Probably our biggest challenge is our biggest challenge to continue to work on is is kind of that shared sanitary storm sewer peaking problem of trying to get sump pumps routed outside rather than into the sanitary sewer, so we don't put our sanitary sewer in a position, our wastewater treatment plant in a position where they have to make a not great decision about what to do when they're overwhelmed. So that's a stormwater and sanitary sewer thing we want to work together on. And then simple education with both businesses and residents about monitoring trash receptacles, oil and grease sorts of things. You know, oil and grease doesn't belong in the sanitary sewer. It doesn't belong in the storm sewer. It belongs in the oil and grease disposal system, heading out to be reprocessed or taken care of somewhere else. And then everyone who buys a home goes through the process of learning how to mow their yard and ideally not discharge that into the street. And that will be, no matter how long I work here, convincing people not to discharge their grass into the street will be something that maintains my job security, because once we track down and manage one neighborhood's, grass, we're on to the next one and convincing a new group of folks that the street isn't the right place for grass or leaves.
Chairman Peary, you went from your mic on to mute when you started talking.
All right, any other questions for Brad?
I was just curious, is there a fine or anything for discharging your grass or leaves onto the street? I mean, if you can see that it's like egregious, like they're just dumping it on there,
So we've never got to the point of egregious. It's an education sort of thing, a conversation, and folks stop doing it. We haven't encountered a situation where somebody has insisted on doing it after we've had a conversation with them. And our kudos to our law enforcement. I know that the police will, from time to time, see it happening and stop. I know that folks from other departments will. It seems a little less common. I think it is becoming much less common to blow your leaves into the street since we've got the free yard waste dump. And I'm still young enough to remember. I'm still old enough to remember when people used to burn leaves out in the street in my hometown. But I think the old-fashioned leaf burning in the street parties are pretty far removed from most people now, that we don't get as much blowing or raking the leaves into the street as I think we used to. Grass is still a challenge, but again, I think those things are all getting better. And free disposal, that's one of the really important, less obvious goals of the yard waste dump, is to keep yard waste out of places it doesn't belong. It's convenient and it's great and everybody likes it, but it's serving an important purpose more than just being a convenience.
Thanks, Brad. I guess, any other questions for Brad before we move on? Hearing none. Dave, are we ready to look at the building report now?
Yeah, sure. Not much more than the numbers that you see there. We're behind last year at this point in time. We had a fairly large apartment complex issued in the early part of 2020. So still way too early to start thinking about comparisons. And as I always say, we want to look at 5 and 10 year averages and not any individual year or month as having too much meaning. So I'm guessing based on the weather that we'll see more than one page of permits in our next report.
Any questions for Dave on the building report? Well, hearing none, that completes our agenda for this evening. Anybody have anything to add or any comment? Okay, was there a motion to adjourn the meeting?
Andy moves to adjourn.
Mooney Erickson seconds seconds that it. motion.
Who seconded that motion?
Mooney, seconded.
Thank you. Okay, Brooke, roll call, please.
Actually, Mooney,
Mooney, aye.
Mooney, I. Erickson,
Erickson, I.
Erickson, I. Specht,
I.
Specht, I. Womble,
Womble, I.
Womble, I. Syme,
I'm I.
Syme, I. Healy,
Healy, aye.
Healy, I. Winandy,
Andy, I.
Winandy, I. And Pier,
Here, aye.
Pier, I.
Okay, thank you. Meeting's adjourned. We will see you in April. Enjoy the nice weather.